Hi guys, it's Kirsty. Today I'm going to do a video about my recovery journey in a bit more detail and talk about where I'm at now. But before I go into that, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with the new videos as they're released. So I'm going to start at the end of the story right now, so where I'm at now with my OCD, and then I will talk through more about how I got here and my recovery journey. So my experience with OCD currently is that I don't get stuck very often, and if I do get stuck on something, it tends not to last too long because I've had so many peaks and troughs in my recovery journey that I'm kind of getting better and better at unsticking myself and sort of practicing, or do I need to go back into disputing irrational beliefs again, or am I by accident ruminating a bit more again, and do I need to just be a bit conscious, about whether I'm kind of indulging in a bit of rumination about thoughts when they're coming in. But generally, I don't struggle that much with my OCD anymore. Not for too long. I might have a bad day of it, but and I'll notice intrusive thoughts when they come in, and sometimes they do feel very intrusive. But I feel like I've reached a point with accepting uncertainty and rationality where I am able to just leave them there, and OCD doesn't dictate any of my life decisions. That was one thing that did help me on my recovery journey, is that initially it was dictating the way I was living my life, but once I got myself clued up about OCD, I would kind of just push through to do the things that I wanted to do. And the more I learnt about it and discovered that it was holding me back in certain ways, the more I kind of tried to tackle the way it was holding me back. So that's where I'm at right now. And since I realised that I have OCD about 3.5 years ago, so I'm 34 now, since then I have bought a house with my partner, bought a dog with my partner, I've changed careers, and I've got engaged. So this is I just want to mention these things to give people who are in the very depths of OCD struggling some hope that you can get to where you want to be, even if it's when you're still experiencing a lot of obsessions. You can still work on your recovery and have moments of happiness. I've reached a point where I love my life. I've kind of, and I love it all the more because it was hard to get it, I suppose, because of the way OCD made me feel every time I wanted to make a change in my life, or, push through a big life event like buying the house, getting engaged, getting a dog, all these things. The fact that it wasn't easy for me makes me appreciate it and love it all the more. And on a day-to-day basis, I find that because of the things that I've learned on my recovery journey, I get a lot of joy from small things. And I think that's something that, suffering a lot with something can help you with, is that you find enjoyment in kind of small things. And don't get me wrong, that's not to say that I don't have down days. I definitely do, and I personally am still taking medication, which I am planning on working towards reducing again. But I have, even at a point where my OCD hasn't been affecting my life too much, I have still chosen to stay on medication to help me with my mood. But I do want to challenge myself further now and start reducing that. So this is where I'm at currently. But now I'm going to go back to the beginning to talk through my journey with OCD. So as a child, I didn't have any OCD diagnosis, which I'm grateful for that I didn't need to seek this. As I've learned more and more about OCD, and I've seen documentaries about children with OCD, it makes me really sad that young people would suffering that much. I'm lucky enough to say that I had a happy childhood without any major traumas in it. Looking back now, I was quite a sensitive child. I've always been very sensitive to people's moods, and I've often held quite a strong sense of responsibility, particularly about other people's happiness and their feelings. And I always, even as a child, I now look back and remember always feeling like I couldn't relax or feel okay until I'd tried to make sure that my mum was feeling okay, or my dad or my brother. So even looking back then, I remember being quite sensitive. And having watched Oliver's video where he talks in depth about his recovery journey, I can relate to what he said about looking back and remembering some thoughts and things that he might think, or maybe minor compulsions that he might have done but didn't stick and it didn't cause any suffering. When I think back now, I can identify a few things, but I don't know if it would have been any different to any other child, because it didn't lead to me needing professional help or anything at the time. So the first time I remember experiencing proper physical anxiety and that real fear was when I was 18. In my initial first few weeks at university, I'd moved away from home, and I tried smoking marijuana for the first time properly. And it's to say that it didn't agree with me and that I didn't agree with it would be an understatement. It caused me to have my first panic attack. I was hyperventilating into a McDonald's bag, thinking that I was having an asthma attack, even though I'd never been diagnosed with asthma. So it wasn't great. And then after that, I proceeded to have random panic attacks in my first year of university. The type of panic attacks that very much revolved around, they were quite out of the blue, and it would mainly be focused on physical sensations. So pins and needles in my fingers, a tight throat. I'd feel like throbbing sensations in my neck. So I don't remember a lot of intrusive thoughts at that period. It was more physical anxiety that would kind of come out of the blue. I think if we were going to put labels on things, you might say it was panic disorder, perhaps. I'm not quite sure. And I experienced some derealization as well. That it kind of led to that, because after a while it was like, am I having a panic attack or am I just going downright mad? So that I experienced that. And I very briefly saw a counsellor at university who identified the fact that I have a fear of feeling out of control. I mean, who doesn't, in fairness? But I really hated, I felt self-absorbed talking about myself to this counsellor, and so I only went to one session and then left it. But the panic attacks seemed to calm down a little bit after that. I'm not quite sure why, but after my first year of university, I was out of halls of residence, went home for the summer, and then went back to university for my second year. I don't remember having regular panic attacks. I would occasionally have fixations on certain health things. So I seem to remember at the time it was blood clots that I was worried about, and meningitis rash, where meningitis rash, apparently if you put a glass against it and the red blotches don't disappear. Anyway, I would do that quite a lot. But again, and another similarity to Oliver's story is that these things weren't sticking for too long, because quite often they could be disproved. So for the rest of my time at university, I didn't struggle too badly with the panic attacks and health anxiety. In my final year of university, it was very stressful, but it was real life stress, and I was very busy and I was focused on what I needed to get done rather than anxiety. So post-university, I graduated when I was 22 because I did four-year course at university. I was in a nice relationship after university with a very lovely person. And I was quite settled in my life, but I struggled quite badly after that with anxiety surrounding work. I started working in the retail industry. That was what my degree was about. In quite a stressful job role, actually. And it was quite demanding, quite long hours, and it could be quite cutthroat. And as quite a sensitive person, it was at times quite hard to take for me. And I would find myself coming home and analysing what had been done in the day. And I feel like I had always ruminated. Now looking back, I didn't know what rumination was, and I didn't know that it was negative or that not everybody did it as much as I do. But I have always ruminated. However, I can pinpoint this as maybe the period where the rumination ramped up a lot more, and I started to spend a lot more time in my head and find things harder to let go. So when I wasn't at work, then it was very important that I enjoyed relaxation. And I think this is when I started to recognize the fact that I was feeling stressed, and that was causing me to feel a bit anxious. So this is maybe 10 to 12 years ago now. So mental health is more widely spoken about. I'd say feels like in the last 5 years or something, but it still wasn't I didn't feel comfortable talking about it too much to people. I would speak about feeling stressed to my family and my then boyfriends. But I didn't really talk about it to many other people because, and a couple of good friends I could discuss it with, because I was kind of ashamed that it felt wrong. I felt like I wasn't good enough because I was feeling stressed, and that was very much a theme for me throughout my career in what I did. Retail merchandising was kind of never really quite feeling good enough, but really in hindsight it was actually that it wasn't necessarily the best personality fit for me for the job, for me and me for the job perhaps. So yes, I would be stressing, analysing conversations at work, and kind of worrying about mistakes that I might have made, and going back and checking things a little bit. But I didn't get too much into checking compulsions, but it was very much rumination, talking about work obsessively outside work. And to be honest, just feeling quite down because I could never not be thinking about work. And I would then beat myself up about the fact that I was thinking about work when I wasn't at work. So that made it even worse. And then, so a couple of years later, I ended the relationship that I was in. And in hindsight now, I think there may have been some relationship OCD at play there, because when I started to have doubts, it felt very urgent for me to end the relationship, even though at the time I didn't really want to end the relationship. And this is a trigger warning for anyone with ROCD, is that in hindsight now, I am glad I did end the relationship because it's led me to where I'm at now. But at the time, I'm not 100% sure if that was, I wasn't sure that was what I wanted to do. But the anxiety, and I literally couldn't stop thinking about it. I had this sense of urgency. And then after I did, I felt just incredibly down afterwards for quite a long time. And it took me a few months to kind of feel myself again, and I had some kind of I'd had a couple of panic attacks actually afterwards, which again makes me think that there was some OCD at play there. So then, as I was starting to feel a bit better in myself again, and I was doing quite well at work. I'd been through quite an anxious period again at work. I was at a new job at this time, but still in the same career. I had a bombshell, to say the least. My mum had been having some back pain at night time, and I think perhaps I didn't realise how bad it was. So she had been for physiotherapy, and she had I've completely forgotten what you call it when you put needles into your skin. Anyway, these things didn't work, and she had she had scans and an appointment to look into what it really was. And what my mum didn't want to tell me, I think, at this period, that she was suspecting the situation was a lot worse than they originally thought. It turned out that she was suffering with terminal cancer of the pancreas, and it had spread to her liver. So this to me was quite out of the blue. It was 2011, and in February, that was when sort of end of January, February, she started to talk about the pain in her back. And then it was the 3rd of March that we found out that it was terminal cancer. So the day we found out it was cancer was the day we found out it was terminal. So in terms of trauma, I was lucky enough not to experience it until that day. And while it's not trauma in regards to witnessing a war or a car crash or being attacked, it's trauma in a sense that, I mean, the rug was 100% pulled out from under me. My mum was my best friend. I spoke to her every day. We were incredibly close, and that, you know, the parent-child relationship has to change when one of the parents is ill. And the next sort of 6 months was very much a whirlwind of, you know, traumatizing things happening, you know, watching somebody being reduced to, you know, a shadow of themselves, really, in the space of 6 months. And when people are dying, they can, you know, they become confused. And my mum's funeral was the first funeral I ever went to. So that was how kind of, in reality, charmed my existence was before that. But at the time, there wasn't anxiety at play because I had no time to sit and think about myself. I kept telling myself that I can just give up when Mum's passed away, but right now I need to be strong for Mum, and I need to get on with it, and I need to, you know, do what needs to be done. Basically, I can't put myself first. It's all about my mum, and then I can fall apart. I can have a breakdown. I can do whatever I want when it's just about me again. But the difference was that after my mum passed away, it left me, my dad, and my brother, and my dad needed support then. And me, my dad, and my brother were very, very close. We were always a close family. But I very much did take on this responsibility. I felt responsibility for my dad's well-being, particularly more than mine. So I threw myself back into life, and it was hard, and I did struggle with sadness, and I, for the first time, went on medication to help me with my mood. I think it was about 6 to 9 months after my mum passed away. But still, during this time, anxiety wasn't a big feature in my life. It was more kind of just readjusting to the way life was then. And lucky to be surrounded by amazing friends and to still have an amazing dad and brother as well. So this time period was from the age of 25 and then to about 27. And I think looking back now at about 27, this is when I feel like more anxiety, OCD was creeping in for me. I moved into a studio flat on my own so I could have some privacy out of house shares, because quite a lot of my friends were starting to move in with their partners. The 3 friends that I'd lived with after university had all moved in with their partners. So I thought, well, I want to have my own place, even though I couldn't afford it. And it was then that my work was continuing to get very busy. And so I had this stress. I was stressing about work. I was feeling lonely from time to time in my studio, and I started to get quite a lot of anxiety when I was dating as well. I'd almost be anticipating it to go wrong. And actually, I feel embarrassed to admit now that I would obsessively check text messages to see if people had contacted me back. And during this time, I also experienced a return of health obsessions as well, in the form of being overly kind of conscious of developing cancer, which I think is probably understandable given what happened with my mum. So in this period of time, I again, the rumination was a huge thing. So like so much time spent ruminating. And this continued. I would read various self-help books. And then I moved in with a friend when I was about 29, and I started to feel a bit more settled when I was living here. It was more affordable for me. And I was encouraged by doctors to start coming off my medication. I was very much thinking, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But now in hindsight, I wonder if that medication was helping me to manage my anxiety as well as low mood. So I started to taper off the medication, eventually came off it when I was 29. And it was around about the age of 29, well, it was the age of 29 actually, not around about the age, I met my now partner. And we got into a relationship. And I was so happy because I'd been wanting to meet someone special and find a lovely relationship. And I found it, and we moved in together a year later. But I don't know if it was because I'd finally found a point where I was feeling quite happy and settled, or if it was because I came off the medication. I don't know. But my anxiety just ramped up. It was... Also, at this point, I had started a new job, which was and it was a promotional position. It was extremely stressful. So I think the kind of big stresses about my job. I was working very, very long hours. And I was again at a point where I was struggling to enjoy and relax my free time outside work because I was constantly thinking about work, and I was having a lot of health obsessions about cancer. Just before I was about to go on my first holiday with my partner, and we were living together at this point, I'd had a dentist highlight a black blotch in my mouth, which I now know was a infection. But at the time, I suddenly became convinced that I had cancer. So I had a lovely first holiday with my partner, but I kept on thinking that it would be my last holiday with him or anyone, because I had created a whole story in my mind that I had secondary cancer on my jaw. And I created it as secondary cancer because then that would make it untreatable or something. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And then when I finally could disprove this by going to see a specialist dentist, there would be other health obsessions as well as being incredibly anxious about work. So obsessions about a numb patch on my leg, and then I asked to go for an MRI and various things, and I'd find excuses to try and get a blood test. So because I was quite fixated on inflammation markers in your blood, because that can indicate cancer or something. That was what indicated with my mum initially, that there was something serious going on. So I was very, very determined to not have them show up in my blood, and then I could relax again. But of course, all of these health obsessions, they can be disproven, and then another one pop up, until just before a very good friend of mine got married in France, and it was just after my partner and I celebrated 2 years together, relationship OCD kicked in. And it was one thought that bounced back a couple of times. I was like, okay, maybe I need to think about this. And then suddenly it was panic attack. And then it was locked on, fully locked on. And I did not know what was happening with me. This relationship that I was really happy in, the best relationship that I'd been in, The last thing I wanted to do was leave my partner, my lovely flat with him. But I couldn't stop having thoughts that I would have to, and, you know, thoughts about loving, and every angle that relationship OCD can grab onto, it did. And I went on holiday to France for my good friend's wedding, in which I was a bridesmaid. I had strong sleeping pills, which I took every night. I was drinking quite a lot on that holiday, but the thoughts were pound, pound, pound. And when I returned home to go back to work, I walked into the office and I just realised I can't do this. I've barely eaten in days. I've barely slept because my appetite had completely gone. And I just said, I need to go home. And I saw the doctor, and I was then signed off work for 3 weeks because I just was not functioning. I couldn't eat, and when I did try to eat, I was retching, felt like I couldn't hold the food down. I couldn't stop going to the toilet to urinate. I couldn't sleep at night. Every time I would be falling asleep, a thought would pop in. I'd wake up sort of it was, yeah, and I couldn't hold conversations with people. I had completely lost my sense of humour. It's something that I kind of pride myself on, is my sense of humour, but I'd lost my laugh. I just couldn't. It felt like the worst thing in the world to me at the time, to be honest. I remember actually feeling so bad that I wished I did have cancer, because I felt bad. I mean, I was never suicidal, because I'd be too much of a fraidy cat to hurt myself. But I remember thinking, I wish it was cancer or something other than this. And I started to suspect it might be OCD when I was constantly Googling it, and that was one of my compulsions that I was very much into, was Googling with the health anxiety and all sorts of things. Always Googling, asking people for reassurance. And this was no different, except this was Googling on crack, asking for reassurance on crack. I was desperate. I remember at one point phoning crisis line and then putting the phone down. So I was like, I can't go that far. And this is while I was waiting to hear back from doctors. So I could never give doctors time to get back to me. I would just keep calling them and hounding them because I just so urgently needed to hear from them. I had no patience. It felt like hell, to be honest, at the time. Just being around my partner was incredibly triggering for me. It was like having this thing that I could lose waved in front of me, and that to me at the time was awful, the idea of losing him, but at the same time the idea of staying with him while I was having all these things, feelings and thoughts I felt like I shouldn't be having. At the time I didn't know that thoughts are just thoughts. At the time I didn't know that everything you think and feel doesn't require in-depth analysis, and it doesn't require being confessed to people. I didn't know these things. I didn't know that the ruminating wasn't something that everybody did, and the internal analysis and the checking of feeling. I didn't know that not everyone did this. So even after I started to suspect it was OCD, that felt too good to be true to me. Which is like ridiculous thing to say about OCD, because anyone watching this video would know how extreme the suffering is. But that's the problem, isn't it? That our themes feel so awful and so scary to us that we would rather that it was, you know, this quite torturous mental health condition for a while. We'd rather it was that than that you end your relationship. I made it, you know, it was just awful to me at the time. I started therapy about a month later with a top mental health hospital, and the type of therapy that I received was psychodynamic therapy. Now, at this point, I had also started taking some medication as well, which had, for me, it did help me a lot. I was starting to sleep a little bit better and my appetite was slowly returning. And that was kind of all I needed really at that point. I just needed to be able to function a little bit better. So I started my psychodynamic therapy, and it was a mixture of doing a bit of bereavement counselling, talking through my experience of losing my mum, because they linked my anxiety struggles to that, and we did sort of work on building up my self-esteem, and we did CBT, so challenging thoughts, and looking at a bit of kind of monitoring my moods and what helps and what didn't. So this was helpful. It helped me to identify unhelpful beliefs I had about myself, such as kind of the constant core belief about not being good enough, and that way I could start kind of dismissing thoughts a little bit on that topic, and looking at things that helped me with my mood as well. It helpful to me, and to start to learn a little bit more about self-care and prioritizing my own well-being. So again, these things were really good for me, and being a bit of setting boundaries with people as well in that respect. So whether that's friends, family, work, or whatever. It would basically helped me to kind of get back up and running, get back to work, get back to socialising, which I did. I threw myself back into work after being signed off for 3 weeks. I was initially quite careful with working overtime, but it didn't take me long to get sucked into it, because that was the company and the industry, and that was just the way it was. But also I have to take responsibility for that, and saying that I was still very much people pleasing at the time, and also I was doing it to keep my anxiety down as well, because I didn't want to add anxiety about doing badly at work to my OCD obsessions. So while I was having this therapy, there were some things that weren't very useful. She'd dig into my relationship, and she would dig into my relationship with my dad as well, which neither of those things were particularly helpful. She did some psychoanalysis with me, and again, that kind of just I think it can be very useful at certain times, but because I was in the thick of OCD, I was very internally focused, and I was already trying to analyse what was going on so I could reassure myself. So it just kind of encouraged me a little bit in some ways, I think, to try and find reasons. And then I started to have other intrusive thoughts from other themes, like some harm, some POCD, and then some like kind of like false memories as well, because I was trying to analyse why I was the way I was, to reassure myself. And after about, I think perhaps maybe 7 months of this therapy, I got to a point, and it's like it has helped me get to a point where I am kind of up and running. But I did suspect that it was OCD that I was suffering with, but I wasn't being treated for OCD. I tried mentioning exposure, and she said, let's not get sidetracked. So because I had my own theories, I was then reading every book about OCD under the sun, like whatever I could get my hands on. And I realised that the technique that she'd given me for the thoughts was kind of almost like a pre-planned speech. It wasn't working. And so then I was trying to do, reattribute, relabel, as per brain lock. And this could sometimes help me to get a grip on not getting into too much rumination I had control over. It kind of stopped me in my tracks, but I still was ruminating uncontrollably, even though I wasn't Googling or asking about reassurance or even talking about it anymore. A lot of the ruminating was uncontrollable, and it was because I was still absolutely petrified of losing my relationship or being stuck the way I was forever and not being able to get treatment. So I finished treatment with that therapist, and I started looking to other therapists, but for quite a while I was quite afraid to seek more therapy, even though I suspected I needed to seek OCD help for OCD. I was afraid to do that because I was afraid that they'd say it wasn't OCD. Eventually, I started to listen to OCD podcasts. OCD Story was useful for me. It sort of, especially when they had the OCD therapists, a specialist talking about it, it was very educational for me. At this point, I'd done a hell of a lot of research. I knew a lot about OCD, which has actually been useful for me for these videos. But it was compulsive. Definitely the research was compulsive because I was terrified of being stuck the way I was. I had a deposit to move in to buy a house with my partner, and I wanted to do that, but I wanted to change my job as well, and I was stuck on which one I should try and do first. So then I was doing neither of them, so I was still stuck in my life and in my head. I started loitering around the OCD recovery Instagram page because I was following a lot of OCD things on social media. At the time it was OCD Treated, and I noticed there were quite a few posts about relationship OCD, and it was a real relief for me because it was like, okay, so this person seems to understand relationship OCD, which was huge for me. Anyone that understood relationship OCD was just, you know, I needed to speak to them. And then you know, other things that were being posted, it really spoke to me. So I think after a couple of months of loitering around the page, I finally gathered the courage to send a message and ask, you know, if maybe we could work together. So it was around that time, which would have been maybe about 9 months after my ROCD got very severe, that I started working with OCD recovery with Rob. And this is where I started learning about acceptance and tackling irrational beliefs. And one of the first things that Rob asked me when we started to work together was, why must you be in the right relationship? Why must you know that you're in the right relationship? Where's it written? Why? Where is it written that you must feel love for your partner at all times? It started asking questions like this, and nobody had said that before. You know, why do you have to feel a certain way? Why does it have to be this? It was all analysing why you don't and trying to work towards feeling it again, but there was not questioning of where these ideas even come from. So then we started to look at it like this, you know, to look at reducing how awful I found my worst case scenarios, to look at something that was also keeping me feeling blue about it was the fact that I felt like it was terribly unfair that I was having this experience with mental health when I'd been through what I'd been through with losing my mum. I thought that was really unfair, and I thought I didn't deserve it. And we tackled the idea of fairness and deserving, realising that these are irrational, and to hold on to those beliefs was making me feel worse, keeping me away from tackling my OCD, really, because I wasn't accepting having OCD because I thought it was unfair and that I didn't deserve it. So this really helped me to start breaking down these beliefs. And then we would work through doing some shame attacks as well to practice sort of not needing people's approval as much. I had very much been a people pleaser, and I still I would say I've now reached a point where I'm conscious of those urges, and I'm very conscious of not being a people pleaser now, because I've seen where it can get you, and it's not very far. So, well, it is far, but not in a good direction, in my opinion. So we started working on shame attacks to not need other people's approval so much. You know, looking at worst case scenarios of my various fears that I had surrounding relationship, work, health, and starting to look at the irrationalities, the irrational beliefs that I held that were fueling them. And we would work at some weeks, you know, maybe we'd do less disputing if I was getting a bit too compulsive about it, because we started to realise that one of the things that was keeping me going with my fears, my obsessions, was the fear of fear. So I was terrified of going back to square one and being stuck like that. So then some of my exposures started to be focused around mental health struggling, you know, expose myself to the idea of feeling more physical anxiety, or my OCD not getting better, or this is as good as it gets. And also at this time I realised that the only thing holding me back was myself. So I went in headfirst into looking at houses with my partner. And what really helped me in this period was having the support group. On the WhatsApp support group, we could all encourage each other through you know, the milestones, whether that's the difficult exposures or the big life events. My OCD was bombarding me when I was doing the house viewings. It was like, it felt like it was physically punching me in the gut. But I did it, and we got our house. We moved in a few months later, and you know, there were new triggers then. Every time I was decorating, I had the sort of, you know, ruminations. Oh, what if you know, you spend all this time doing this decorating and it doesn't work out, you know, various things like that. And then it started would be twisting to having other mental health conditions as well, or now happy got the house, now probably gonna die of cancer, and you know, various other obsessions would come creeping in. But I just worked on my house decorating, and I discovered a real big passion of mine being gardening. I had my first garden, and this is something that's really helped me with my mental health. This thing I read about called flow, when you're very much kind of in the moment and you're kind of just going with what you're doing. I feel like I've experienced that with gardening. I just potter around my garden, and I just feel kind of grounded, and it's really helped me. And then I decided it was time, I think the following year, to change my job. I'd been unhappy for a really long time, and I just knew that for my mental health as well. And it wasn't an avoidance thing. I had tackled irrational beliefs about my career, about, oh, can't be jobless, can't go back to the beginning, because I'd got to a position where I was managing at that point. And I was thinking, if I change career, I'll have to go backwards. So again, I could apply what I'd learned about irrationality to this, and you know, not needing other people's approval, and go for a job that was more suitable to the lifestyle I wanted. So I left my job. I had a few months off work, bought a dog, which was something that I'd been wanting for a very long time, because I love dogs, but I love animals generally, but particularly dogs. And then this spiked my OCD again, because it was a new kind of commitment, and also it was this precious tiny little thing that, you know, you're responsible for, and you don't want to hurt it, you don't want other people to hurt it, you don't want to lose control and hurt it, all these sorts of things. So this is another thing. So then it's sort of, you know, tackling the irrational beliefs around harm, OCD, and you know, again, it was spikes in ROCD that I needed to sort of find my way through. And each time there was a new spike, because of job stresses, or because of buying a house, or go to a wedding, or anything like that. It was new. It felt horrible at the time, and at the time it felt like you were never going to get through it, and you know, oh God, I'm back there again. But then once you've had maybe 5 of those, you start to realize that each time you have gotten through it, and you don't doubt it as much. And that was my experience. When I'm having a bad day now, I think part of the reason it doesn't stick so much, because I know that it's not, I know that it's, even if it ended up being a bad week, I know that I could work through it again. And I know that it's because of an irrational, there's irrational beliefs there still hanging around that I would need to gradually work on. And however long it took, I knew that eventually I could feel a bit better. And this is the thing, it's very much perseverance, and it's very much patience. Perseverance and patience, things that I maybe wasn't always the best at, but my OCD recovery journey has really harnessed those skills of mine, which has been really useful for me. So this is what's led me to the point I'm at now, is kind of finding a balance in my life of being conscious of my OCD and still working on it a little bit, because there are still some sticky irrational beliefs that are still loitering around naturally. But I'm able to live my life happily, and I would say kind of reasonably okay mental health. Because I'm quite proactive with managing it, and I know myself quite well now, and you know, the things that help me to manage my mental health, I'm able to kind of be conscious of my actions, my behaviours, or you know, what I'm doing. And I have more control over my ruminations now as well. I will find myself ruminating from time to time. I mean, those habits were 30 odd years in the making, but I can now notice when I'm going into it and think, hang on, I don't have to do that anymore, do I? Because I'd rather risk this thing being true than live my life the way I used to live it, with having to analyze and pick apart every detail. God. And I think about it, just to think I there's other things I want to be doing, and so I do them. One thing that does still hang around with me is sort of intrusive dreams, I suppose. And it's been particularly active the last 6 months. I think being on lockdown has made me dream more, maybe because of the lack of mental stimulation during the day. So it's like a soap opera in my head at night time. But I plan to continue to try and keep the balance between being conscious of my OCD and keeping my tools sharpened, looking for, you know, if there's an exposure opportunity, not to shy away from it. But at the same time, I also keep an eye on myself for compulsively trying to not have OCD, because that simply doesn't work. But I hope this video has been useful and can give some hope in terms of where you can get to. I believe I've still got further to go, and you know, I look forward to getting there, but I'm okay as I am right now as well. Again, I think that's something I want to be careful of, is not coasting. But there is a huge element in OCD recovery of letting time pass and showing your mind that you can tolerate it, and also you can let go of the irrational beliefs that it's awful and that you can't stand it, etc. But anyway, I need to stop talking now because it's been quite a long video, so take care. Bye.